Welcome, class, to a workshop on Coach Joe rules. In this lesson, we will review Coach Joe rule number 40, which states, test for happy and unhappy paths. Consider a childhood game where the player tries to guess a number from 1 to 10. You would expect to see these tests. Given the correct number is 5, when the player guesses 5, then display correct. When the player guesses 4, then display too low. And when the player guesses 6, then display too high. What happens if the player guesses 42? Or 7.3? Or XYZ? Tests should account for happy and unhappy path situations. Happy path testing represents the perfect situation where everything goes right and nothing ever goes wrong. These three tests are considered happy path. The input provided could be too low, too high, or the correct value. They are designed for the perfect world. The reality is, things go wrong. Unhappy path testing is the opposite and includes any alternative or exception paths that may be possible. An example would be -4. The game is not expecting a value less than 1. There should be application code and a test to prevent the player from making this guess. Happy and unhappy path testing can be useful in both BDD and TDD. BDD tests ensure the application behaves as the end user would expect. TDD tests ensure each unit of code functions correctly inside the application. Be sure to account for unhappy path tests. All too often, developers write tests to cover the happy paths and fail to provide proper coverage of the unhappy path situations. With a little experience, identifying and properly handling these situations inside the application will become easier. With that being said, you will never find them all. Smaller projects are easier to find most, if not all. The bigger the project, the more unrealistic it becomes. Do your best to prevent the obvious ones and add more tests as new issues are discovered. Here are some common unhappy path situations to consider. Conditionals in the code are the most commonly missed unhappy path tests. An if statement can be true or false. There could be one test for the true condition and another test for the false condition. A more complex if statement could have more than one condition separated by a logical operator. Each condition can be true or false. The entire decision can be true or false. The opportunity exists for several happy and unhappy path tests. As an added benefit, these tests will improve the code coverage report. Working with objects is another common unhappy path test. There should be a test for a null object, empty object, and a created object. There might be exceptions for these tests if a prior method step guarantees only valid objects are used. User-provided data should always be validated and tested for happy and unhappy paths. Here are a few common unhappy path examples. Check for input or range limits. An edge case will verify the minimum and maximum values allowed. Another edge case will verify the minimum and maximum values have not been exceeded. Check for invalid data types. And check for invalid characters. There could be many other situational-based tests needed for user-provided data. Data provided from an outside source like files, databases, or a web service should also have happy and unhappy path tests. Here are a few common unhappy path examples. What happens if a null value is provided? What happens with an empty string value? Or an empty list or object? These unhappy paths should be accounted for. What happens if the file cannot be found? What happens if the connection to the database or web service fails? What is the exception path during this failure? There could be many other situational-based tests needed for data provided by an outside system. It takes time to write tests and application code for each unhappy path situation. With an unlimited number of unhappy path possibilities, writing clean code, and application deadlines, you will need to find a happy balance. Not all unhappy path tests can be covered, but you should cover the important ones. I challenge you to include happy and unhappy path tests inside your application. Leave a comment down below with other testing considerations you and your team make. Look for other helpful Coach Joe videos. Remember, future senior developers, make it work, prove it works, then make it better. Ready? Break!